Yeah. As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH-LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everybody. And just when I say good morning, everybody, literally good morning to everybody in the world, because fortunately with WNHH 103.5 FM, although it's a low power station, the LP low power really just pertains to a federal FCC designation. Through the internet, et cetera, people can kind of tune in from throughout the world. And so I just like to kind of just greet everybody. And I have kind of a world traveler with me as well today, Darin Latimore. Darin is the Yale School of Medicine's first Deputy Dean of Diversity and Inclusion and its first Chief Diversity Officer. Welcome, Darin. Good morning.
Good morning. It's nice to see you again, sir.
And Darin was kind enough to kind of be on this show about maybe 2.5 years ago, and he's been here since 2000. When I say here in New Haven, since 2017 rather. But prior to that, he was at the University of California, Davis School of Medicine, where he was the Associate Dean for Student and Resident Diversity. And he had obtained his medical degree at the University of California, Davis School, and completed his residency in internal medicine at the University of California, Davis Medical Center as well. He's worked as a physician, and so you may hear me interchange Dr. Latimore with Darin, so we'll kind of interchange those two abbreviations. But he worked as a physician specializing in HIV care with the Permanente Medical Group in South Sacramento, California. I'm mentioning, Darin, these West Coast names because you've been on the East Coast. What's it like? I mean, you're just you can deal with climates regardless of whether it's hot or cold.
Sadly, I was talking to my family yesterday and I was like, they're like, oh, it's 65 degrees here. Oh, we're out in the backyard starting to work the soil to plant our gardens. And I'm sitting here shivering. But to be truthful, I've actually acclimated to Connecticut quite well. To be 100% honest with you, it was a lot easier than I expected.
Excellent. And we want to continue to extend the right hand of fellowship and open arms to you. I'm so glad we could talk today because people have heard this word diversity and inclusion, and they even abbreviated it into D&I. Darin, I come from the old affirmative action world that you don't even hear the word affirmative action anymore. And if I said OFCCP to you, the Office of Federal Contract and Compliance Programs, people have forgotten about that. So D&I, diversity and inclusion, is something that's been connected to a lot of national and federal and state and school policies. And so, unfortunately, when I think of the West Coast and Rodney King and the great philosopher Rodney King, when he talked about can we all just get along, that seems to me that we're still trying to deal with making that getting along a reality rather than a challenge or a cross to bear or something that's kind of not conceivable. But so I was really anxious to talk to you because given your history, you have a number of firsts on the West Coast. Now you're here in New Haven as the first Deputy Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at the Yale Medical School. Tell us about that journey a little bit. We're going to chat about some of your achievements, some of the crosses that you don't necessarily bear solely, but the seriousness of how you take your purpose. And we have about 54 or so minutes, so no need to kind of rush. I will say, Darin, I've looked at some of your TED Talks, so you're able to go a while. And we need you to be comfortable in doing that. So all these topics are really, really key in terms of really, from my standpoint, where are we going as a civilization? But just to be more specific, as the first Deputy Dean for Diversity and Inclusion and the first Chief Diversity Officer here at the Yale Med School, talk to me. I mean, what do people need to know about you? Need to know about your challenges, need to know about what you're accomplishing, and also throw in how people can help you. You do not have to bear this cross alone.
So I'll start more globally, where you were talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion. And unfortunately, our previous president spent a great deal of time and energy flipping the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion upside down. Really, honestly, data strongly supports that the more diverse an environment you have, the better that environment will be. In a workforce environment, the more diverse it is, the more likely that the quality of the products that you will produce will be better, because you have diverse minds looking at it, thinking about it, bringing diverse perspectives. Mm-hmm. And so although we spent the last 4 years with an administration that had chosen, for whatever the reason, to make diversity seem like an evil thing, I want to remind all of our listeners that diversity brings excellence, and it is through our diversity that we actually will get to the places that we really need to be in this world. Inclusion gets thrown in with diversity all the time, but I really want us to think about those two things differently. Think about diversity as who's in the room. You can look as you have X number of males, X number of women, X number of this gender, race, this ethnicity. Inclusion is more about the sense of belonging. What is that institution? What is that environment doing to create an environment where I, as a Black man, feel like this is a place that I belong? And I think of inclusion as proactive. It's not just sitting around hoping that I feel like I'm invited to the party, but really doing things to make sure that I, as whatever my identities are, feel that I'm truly invited to the party and that my voice has value. So diversity, the actual numbers, who's in the room. Inclusion is really, what are we doing to make sure that everyone in that room feels that they belong and are valued?
Tell me about I really appreciate that kind of overall context. Tell me about what's your sense of why this has been needed in 2021, Monday, March 8th. To some degree, it saddens me just to even articulate the fact that we're still talking about getting along, respecting one another, liking one another. If not liking, just not wanting to kill one another. We hear this term racism as a public health crisis. So I try to stay optimistic, and talking to you inspires me. But why? What are your thoughts about that?
So I start off with a theme of Black men. I was just part of looking at a video of white coats for Black Lives. And they actually restated, which has definitely been shown to be true, there are fewer Black men going to medical school now than in the 70s. So why do we still need to have this conversation? Because structural and systemic racism has held America back. We have not made the advances that one would think. Since like you said, we've been talking about affirmative action and then multiculturalism and then now diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've been talking about these things, but the fabric of our nation has not allowed us to really make the progress that one would think have been made for all the energy and effort that's gone into this. And so, yes, we absolutely need to continue this conversation. We still have incredible numbers of Black and brown bodies in the prison system instead of in colleges. So until we have some real true structural changes in our nation, there's plenty of work that still needs to be done.
And in talking offline before the show, not to be disparaging of your power and your largesse and your influence, but you're only one person on the planet. I'm only one person on the planet, but I was impressed with the fact that even in your immediate sphere of influence at the medical school, there's something called a strategic plan that you've been able to implement. People talk about we can philosophize forever, but getting the work done is another story. So maybe share, if you're willing, share a little bit with us about the.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the initiatives that I am most proud of since coming to Yale. And we had been working on this a while, but really, truly, George Floyd's murder, Black Lives Matter, resurgence of a movement, really said that we need to double down and get this done. And so what a diversity strategic plan is looking at recruitment, it's looking at retention, it's looking, again, like I said, at creating that inclusive environment, it's looking at the pipeline. So it is a comprehensive strategy to create a more diverse and inclusive environment at Yale School of Medicine. And the good thing about our plan is it's not a whole lot of fluff. Every single idea or initiative has measurables, has action items, and therefore someone could be held accountable to making sure we are making correct movement in that direction. I'm a strong believer that things that you measure are the things that get done. Things that you hold up and remind people about are the things that become priorities. And so by having a diversity strategic plan, this elevates the importance of this work and making sure this movement at the School of Medicine to drastically increase the chances that when I talk to you a year from now, that I'll be able to list a list of initiatives that actually have moved forward. And I can say already, we have already done a few things on the strategic plan. So for example, we had something called the Intersection Symposium, which is a symposium that Yale School of Medicine held up, but collaborated with 25 other institutions where everyone was invited, but we made a special effort to reach out to minority postdocs who are about ready to look for faculty positions to make sure that they were invited to give a talk about their science, about what they would want to do as a faculty member. And we had 30% of the people who applied to the symposium were minorities. So that whole, there aren't any minorities, the pipeline doesn't exist, that myth was thrown out the window. And because we looked at not just their CV and their science, we also had them write an essay on what will they do and what have they done to contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they had to raise above a certain bar for all aspects of the application. Because of that, over 50% of the people who actually gave talks were people who would identify as being underrepresented in medicine or minoritized in some other way. And so that's one thing that's already come out of it. Another thing that's come out of it already is this summer we will be hosting for the first time at the School of Medicine Meharry first-year medical students. Because one of the things that we feel that we need to be doing more at Yale is partnering with the historically Black colleges and universities, Meharry being one of the medical schools that is an HBCU. And as part of the strategic plan, we have already brought that to fruition. So again, this is not just a document, I apologize. This is truly a call to action for Yale School of Medicine.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Darin, but I believe in the past you've mentioned from the academic pipeline, kind of infusing that with people of color and expertise. But I believe you've worked with high school students as well.
Yes, we HPrep and our medical students are the ones who, in all honesty, our SMA and LMSA, they're the ones who really run that program. And before COVID, we would actually bring them onto campus for several weeks to really give them a sense of, yes, they can. There is no reason why they can't be a doctor or a scientist if they so choose to. We've also worked with elementary school students before COVID, and we partner with Monk Foundation, who helps bring the art into that program. So yes, if we're going to change the numbers, again, like I said, there are fewer Black men becoming doctors now than in the 70s. If we are going to change that, we must start at the youngest age, letting our youth know, yes, they can. There is no reason that they cannot be me.
It's part of the reason I really love it. There are a number of reasons I love to do this show, but one is oftentimes folks aren't always aware or have the information about what structural consensus, structural agreement, structural decision-making. So your share with people in terms of your strategic plan, that has to be approved by I'm assuming your dean, I'm assuming by President Sullivan. I mean, that's important.
Yeah, the strategic plan went through multiple levels of of approval and input, shall we say. So yes, the university as a whole is on board with the plan.
And when you say university, not just the medical school, but even to the president's office.
Yes, yes.
And that's key because folks often they get confused by Yeoman Haven Hospital, the medical school, the university, undergraduate. But in some ways, there's an interconnection that's really important. So what I hear you saying is you're impacting kind of all of those sectors, because we often hear about the town gown controversy since for 300 or so years, there's been this issue between those of us that live in New Haven and the university. But I love what you're doing in that regard. This type of work, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this type of work might be a little, sometimes if not frustrating, tiresome or challenging. Do you want to talk about that at all?
So as a chief diversity officer, I will say that many of us across the nation are talking about how exhausting it is because, and again, I'm going to be very clear. I'm not talking about Yale. I'm talking nationally at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about the need for a real robust strategic plans at every institution,
mm-hmm.
real marching orders on how to move forward. And and many will say that, including myself, that the work got accelerated because of the national dialogue that was going on. And I'm grateful. I mean, I'm grateful. But if you ask me, how many talks have I given since George Floyd's murder? How many town halls? How many conversations have I personally, just one individual, facilitated around race since then? And it is 90 to 100. I, Darin, Latimore, personally have been involved. And there's many others going on that I'm not actually involved in, but literally 90 to 100 conversations. Now, am I grateful? Absolutely, because it's moving the conversation forward for everyone. But for people like me who do the work, it is exhausting because I'm trying to facilitate a conversation around the latest murder, quite frankly, while I'm also mourning the latest murder like everybody else is. I'm trying to facilitate a conversation about how we move forward as if I am a completely an impartial person, when quite frankly, in my heart, I have a very strong opinion about what needs to happen or what should have happened already. And so, yes, for many chief diversity officers, this work is exhausting because we're the ones who have to be there and absorb all of this for everyone else. And there's not necessarily people there absorbing and helping us deal with the issues that we feel on a personal level around whatever the moment, whatever's going on in that moment. The other thing that I must say, because I'm actually doing interviews specifically right now, the research project that I'm working on is looking specifically at African-American women who are been in academic medicine for at least 3 years. The study is about resilience, what actually is keeping you in academic medicine, what resources, what mentorship, whatever. But even though it's coming from a growth, a glass half full perspective, the research project, I would be remiss to say when I ask questions about how has COVID affected you? How has Black Lives Matter movement affected you? Almost invariably, we get to a place of exhaustion. Almost invariably. And I would not be surprised if after this is over said and done with, if a higher percentage of minority faculty don't leave academic medicine, if not medicine as a whole, because this has been a very exhausting period.
I'm tempted to ask you to say a little bit more about that. And the only reason, because just as you were chatting, Johnny Eric Williams, who's the chair of the sociology department at Trinity College here up in Hartford, we've had a number of talks, and he's mentioned that point as well about the issues that you've just expressed if you're a person of color in an academic institution and what the pressures might be. But let me jump if I can, and I do urge everybody to check out Darin Latimore and Google him in terms of some of your implicit bias chats. So I want to talk about implicit bias to see if you still think it's a functional paradigm, whether the theory has some merit, or is there something even for people to still take the test? I guess because you have spent some time in the past giving it very excellent and provocative TED Talks on this idea of implicit bias.
So do I believe implicit bias is still a real thing? Absolutely. Do I believe that people should spend time learning about themselves? One group of tests that you can take is a Harvard implicit association test to learn what biases you have without question. What I believe the problem is that people stop there. Oh, I have biases. Oh, well, everybody has biases, as if it's an academic exercise. What people need to do is, after you come to the conclusion of what biases you have, and every single human being, including Darin Latimore, Deputy Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, has biases, all of us. But then I need to say, okay, these are my biases. What behaviors do my biases allow me to do? Whose neck does my bias allow me to sit on? What ethnic group does my bias allow me to label a virus? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then start to say, okay, Darin, how do I dismantle those biases and i.e. stop those behaviors? Just knowing that you have bias is not enough. What needs to happen are the negative behaviors associated with those biases. That's what needs to stop.
And this is helpful. So Ibram Kendi's work in terms of anti-racism, you're pretty much a proponent of the need for people to really embrace that educational opportunity.
Correct, absolutely. And we need to, unfortunately, a lot of people are waiting for the BIPOCs to educate them.
When you say BIPOCs, what does that stand for?
Black, Indigenous people, and other people of color.
Okay.
And I would say to some degree, yes. I do a lot. Like I say, I've done 90 plus educational sort of something since George Floyd's murder. But I also would ask each individual to educate themselves. There are lots of readings. It is not hard. You can go on our website. We have pages of resources one can actually look at depending on from what angle they want to look at structural, systemic, and anti-racism. So I just would ask people not to simply wait for the minorities, minoritized, marginalized, and stigmatized to be doing all the educating, and that people actually take it upon themselves to also do some self-education. I also want to be very clear that unfortunately, some minorities, we can actually not treat each other so well. So please, we should not be sitting there thinking that we don't need any education, because quite frankly, there's a lot that we do to one another that needs to stop also. And there's some historical reasons behind that of which we need to better understand.
Well, see, now you're teasing me a little bit by making that statement.
Well, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth because that's a whole conversation within itself.
True. Okay. Well, let's see if we reach an accommodation that perhaps I might extend an invitation to you.
Oh, absolutely.
Discuss that.
That'd be wonderful because that's a conversation within itself. We would be, yes. I'm going to leave it there.
All right. But would some of the topics for that conversation pertain to colorism or
it pertains to colorism? It pertains to intersectionality.
Classism.
Classism, very much so. Very, very much so.
Classing and caste.
And I think caste is probably a better word today. I think it actually suits America much better than America has ever been willing to acknowledge.
And I raise that just to kind of jump back. And again, you listen to the Tom Ficklin show, and Darin Latimore is with us. And Darin is the first chief diversity officer at the Yale School of Medicine. Just when you mentioned even like Meharry, most people might know Meharry's in Nashville, Tennessee, correct? So even just having some folks from the South come up to the North and just, class and caste and just biases about the North and the South, just the way that you're kind of making the Yale experience a national experience and bringing people together from all over the world for that matter in terms of the med school profile. but I really salute you in that regard. Absolutely. Well, what's on your what's burning on your mind and heart and soul these days? Because when I ask that question, my mind goes to the people may have seen over the last 4 or 5 years, med school students protest, white coat protests over a variety of matters, and laying on the street, and dying in representation of people. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So there's many things, but for me personally in doing this work is how do we make the moment sustainable? Having people like myself running around feverishly working as individuals is not sustainable. So how do we get institutions to really change policies, procedures, and norms so that what we're talking about becomes in the fabric and does not require the advocates in the room to be forever beating the drum? Because again, that's just it's not sustainable energy-wise and people's attention-wise, quite frankly. And again, we already talked about the strategic plan. That's my personal approach to making it sustainable and making it part of the fabric. But on a national level, once Black Lives Matter sort of marches sort of die down again, once the news media moves on to something different and not covering Black people being murdered as frequently, then what? Then how do we again keep America's eye on the fact that people based on their identities are treated very inequitably in this country? How do we keep the eye on the prize, which is equity for all?
And I appreciate your saying that. When you hear the phrase, not only the phrase of racism being a public health crisis, but when you observe various states and municipalities adopting these resolutions, and New Haven has just passed a resolution, and also a working group, which is going to be some of the recommendations are going to be proposed to be implemented through our aldermanic chambers. But when you hear this term racism as a public health issue, a public health crisis, what does that mean to you? I mean, you've devoted your life to health.
So I absolutely agree with it. And this is Darin Latimore speaking, so nobody else necessarily adopt this, but we talk a lot about social determinants of health. So housing, access to food, economics, et cetera, et cetera. And the more of it I actually think about those social determinants of health, I ask myself, how many of them, if not all of them, are actually steeped in racism? Is racism actually the epitome, the ultimate social determinant of health? And I'm saying racism, not race, because race is a man-made construct by racists. If we didn't have racists, we probably never would have came up with race in the first place. And so do I believe that racism as a public health issue? Absolutely, because I believe racism is connected to almost all the social determinants of health that we've identified to date.
And I appreciate your saying that you're speaking as Darin.
As Darin, I have no research, no anything, but this has definitely been I've reflected on this a lot over the last year or so. And at least at the moment, this is where Darin stands.
Well, I appreciate it. And you're standing tall, and I respect that. And I certainly concur with you. It's even in just having this dialogue at this moment, this conversation in 2021, and thinking about 1619, et cetera, and what's happened since then, it does. For me, the sense of getting in touch with my anger and not ignoring my anger and not letting my anger destroy me inside, I think is a constant battle that many people are trying to manage. What are you sensing in terms of the younger students? Because you have the benefit of meeting students that are now.
So I'm going to actually reflect on what you just said, and I'm going to talk about the younger students because they definitely need anger. For me personally, it's not losing my hope. The days I wake up and feel more hopeless are the days that frighten me most. Because as long as I have hope, I can move forward. As long as I have hope, quite frankly, I have fire in the belly. The younger generation, as they are supposed to, by design, they definitely still have a lot of anger, a lot of distrust, and a lot of a sense that the entire system needs to be dismantled. This system is not fixable. It needs to be completely dismantled and started afresh. I think we could have a real vigorous conversation about it. It completely needs to be dismantled, but I don't necessarily fault them for why they are where they are. But if you were to ask me where I am, it's about maintaining hope.
Let's shift, and I appreciate your sharing and then being so transparent. Let's shift a little bit, because just as you were talking, my mind was reflecting on your days work. This is not the first medical school for you to work at, and from a residency standpoint and from a student standpoint. My point is, in terms of curriculum, is there something in terms of med school curriculum that can kind of be if not a saving grace, a positive attribute to reversing some of these societal trends that we've observed?
Oh, absolutely. So I'll talk about specifically at the medical school.
Okay.
So one of the initiatives that my office partnered with, what we call medical education office with, was hiring the first, we call her thread leader, and that probably means nothing to the listeners. Dr. Beverly Shears might be a wonderful person to bring on to the program. And Dr. Beverly Shears' role is to look at the curriculum to see where race is actually being used inappropriate, or sex versus gender is being used inappropriate, and to really get the medical school curriculum to actually take a hard look at itself, and to, when necessary, be honest, where racism is really the issue, not race. Where we were talking about these social constructs are the issue, not biology. And, are there diseases where biology is the issue? There are a few where I can literally say, as a Black man, your genetics predispose you to X. But in most cases, that is not true. In most cases, it's the social constructs of which you find yourself in that predispose you. And so taking that new set of lenses into account, Dr. Beverly Shears is looking at our whole curriculum and helping us dismantle what's been in there forever. Oh, Black people more likely to get this and this and this and this, and the list just goes on. I mean, if we were to believe that we as a race are more likely to get all the things that we're told we're more likely to get, I mean, we would never get up off the ground. So really sort of dismantling that in the curriculum and actually replacing it with the actual real issues that lead to higher hypertension, more diabetes, et cetera, et cetera.
I definitely appreciate your mentioning her name, and I will certainly reach out to her. To tell us a little bit, just as we have about 20 or so minutes, but do you recall kind of was there a tipping point moment in terms of wanting to become a doctor? Was there a series of circumstances, a variety of circumstances, a light bulb went off? I'm always curious about how people just, decide to kind of walk their path.
So I decided to be a doctor at 7 years old, and a light bulb absolutely went off. Thank goodness I was a kid and could actually just dream. So a friend of mine, Keith is his name. I don't know where Keith is now. At one point, I know he and his family were in Texas, but I don't know where he is now. We were out playing kickball. A group of us were out there, and his mother had instinctively told him to go put his shoes on. The rest of us didn't have our shoes on, but she saw him without shoes, told him to go put his shoes on. So we were out playing, and soon as mother was out of sight, because nobody else had shoes on, Keith decided to take his shoes off. And let's finish the game. Of course, Keith is the one who steps on a piece of glass and cuts his foot and bleeding everywhere. And so he was way more upset about what his mother was going to do than that little old piece of glass in his foot. And so I remember taking Keith to my house and finding an old towel that my mother never saw again, and just cleaning it up and putting pressure on it and stopping the bleeding. And I remember Keith going from literally crying to, let's go finish the game. And literally that split second, a light bulb said, this is how Darin Latimore can make a difference. I have no doctors in the family, not a single one that I'm aware of, even extended family. Unfortunately, I grew up on between flat out poor and working class poor. And so, county facilities, and sometimes we would have Kaiser. And so my point is, I didn't grow up going to see doctors on a regular basis. I definitely don't remember seeing doctors who looked like me when I was a child. I don't remember a single one. And so this was really a pipe dream, that really just seeing the impact doing what basically was first aid, not true being a doctor, but at 7 years old, I thought I had, cured the world, told me that I could make a difference. And that is really how it started. I have to be honest with you. A lot of people just sort of looked at me when I would say, I'm going to be a doctor. Like, oh okay. But this is how I got here.
I mean, I get the sense you recall that so distinctly. That's so vivid and lucid in your mind at the moment. That's fascinating.
Well, it absolutely is, because it really was the moment that I realized what I wanted to be. Now, again, I want to be honest with you, Tom. I had no clue what I was trying to sign up for. I mean, I had no idea what a doctor really truly did, because, like I said, it was not like I had doctors in the family.
Yes.
But what a doctor became for me at that point in life was someone who could help others, someone who could make a difference. And to be truthful, at its core, that's what a doctor still is for me. It is not just, at that age, it was one person at a time. Now, a doctor could help one patient at a time, but as a physician, I am given voice, I am given access, and I'm actually given power that I would never have been given if I did not have an MD behind my name and looked as I do. And so being a doctor still, in my opinion, at its core, is my avenue to make a difference.
And if we can, let's segue a little bit just when you just mentioned that. Often people don't always understand or believe, or might not just be aware of, that there are doctors that are researchers, there are doctors that are scientists, there are doctors that are discovering remedies and therapies. And so let's chat a little bit about that.
Well, so, and doing both. So what I call an MD doctor are the doctors that go to medical school specifically to learn how to take care of patients. Now, some of us actually many of us do science, including myself. The sort of research that I do, as I discussed earlier, is more looking at the experiences of minoritized, marginalized, and stigmatized people in academic medicine. But then there are other doctors who get the letters PhD behind their name, who actually do more basic science in many cases, but you can also be a doctor of history, or a doctor of education, or even a doctor of theology. So, and those doctors do not see patients. They specifically study important questions to try and come to new discoveries.
So important. Well, going back to the students, the young med students, or students that are thinking about undergraduates, thinking about med school, what kind of stories do you hear? Do they share with you about why they've decided to embark upon that path? And
again, I predominantly work with students who come from minority backgrounds, and often the similarity is that they feel that we need, and they're correct, more doctors who look like them to serve communities that they grew up in. And they're 100% correct. That tends to be what motivates many of them, is seeing a need in certain communities, marginalized communities, that need more doctors, and even, quite frankly, basic scientists. Again, if we want medications to work for all peoples, then we need a diverse group of people creating those medications.
And to participate in the
and to participate in the studies also as patients, absolutely, without question.
That's so important. In about 10 minutes, do you anything burning on your heart? Or I guess wanted to mention something about COVID and the vaccines. But before I do that, just wondering whether.
So the last thing that I will, especially if there's any youth watching or listening, because that's really where my passion is as a child, I was not always encouraged. Matter of fact, the people who were actually being paid, i.e. counselors, teachers, often discouraged me and basically told me what I was not capable of and what I would never achieve. I hope that you will follow your dreams. I hope that if you have a goal of becoming, and whatever that is, a pharmacist, a pediatrician, a astronaut, whatever that is, please do not let adult people around you squelch that dream. To the best of your ability, try and keep the fire within you. Because if you continue to work hard, if you continue to aspire, that is the only way that you have any hope of reaching that goal.
And I really appreciate you sharing that. And just before I go to COVID, talk to me about some of the young people and their interest in science. I mean, often we hear about this science barrier or passing.
Well, up until about the third grade or so, there is no separation. Just as many young people who look like me are interested in being scientists and doctors and blah, 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 until about third grade or so. And which is why I said what I said. Then they go to school. Then they have the people who are supposed to be encouraging them and actually fostering these desires, discouraging them. And then it starts to dwindle. Then you start to see that separation. Then you start to see the separation in standardized test scores, the things that we use as gatekeepers to keep people in and out of the best colleges, to keep people in and out of medical schools, etc. And so I said what I said to speak to the younger generation for a very specific reason. Which is to encourage them to keep motivating themselves. We can't always count on people around us to be our motivation.
Well, hopefully, certainly one of the virtues of the show and the various social media platforms is our ability to share this show widely, and I'll certainly make a special effort to do that. COVID and the vaccines and some people's hesitancy and not having confidence in taking it. You smile, and I'm often asked that question almost daily, and I don't have an answer. Sometimes I just think that we tell people not to smoke, but they'll smoke. I mean, people will sometimes commit suicide and willingly do so. But any thoughts from the medical standpoint about COVID and vaccine?
So first and most importantly, I want to be very clear. It's not my job to tell someone to or not to take the vaccine. I want to be very clear. But if you're asking Darin Latimore, is he going to take the vaccine? Absolutely. Matter of fact, I've been fussing with folks because I have not been given the vaccine yet. Very clear, the Black and brown people are dying from COVID at a rate higher than other people. So I know what the outcome is without no vaccine, without any question. That has been shown to me very, very clear, unfortunately. I know that historically, and I want to also be honest, a medical apartheid has absolutely happened in this country. There is no doubt that Black and brown people and indigenous folks have been used very inappropriately throughout history by the medical field. So I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke and say, oh, no, that hasn't happened. Everybody, but I am going to say that the vaccine is our hope. It's our hope of breaking this cycle. It's our hope of decreasing the number of Black and brown people who are dying from COVID. And again, there is clear data that we're dying at a higher rate, not just getting it at a higher rate, but dying at a higher rate. And the one thing that we can do to stop that is to get the vaccine.
I'm scheduled for my second shot soon. And I appreciate your sharing that. Let's talk as we conclude for the next 4 or 5 minutes on, this might sound like a strange 2 words to mention, but I do want to just mention it. Death and dying in terms of the Black community. Death and dying in terms of the Black community.
Well, I think COVID brought death and dying in terms of the Black community back into focus again, quite frankly. You know, Tom, it seems like we're forever dying. For many reasons. Healthcare disparities, criminalizing Black and brown bodies, not valuing Black and brown bodies. And there's many causes, many structural, systemic, many causes of why we seem to be one of the first to pass away or die, be killed, and the last to actually reap the benefits of society. Hopefully, the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening now, hopefully it will awaken. And it's not us who need to be awakened, because we've been dying along from 403 years in this country. We've known we dying. So hopefully the larger society is really awakened finally to our reality. And more importantly, I hope that the larger society really, truly is ready for change.
Let's shift just as we conclude in terms of because you're although we're in the COVID and remote learning situation, if we weren't, you would be in daily interaction with many people in the medical school, in the community, et cetera, et cetera. Are there pockets of, do you perceive increased pockets of, I don't like to always use the word allies, but people that are more progressive and they're wanting to see humanity first rather than race?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad that you ended here. Without question. I mean, movements prior to this, you would see people of color marching, or you would see white people marching, but you really didn't see a whole lot of blending, in all honesty. There'll be a few here, a little sprinkling, but if you really look at the last year or so, I mean, just everyday common folk, suburban common folk, rural common folk have really said, oh my goodness, something needs to change. And so, yes, the allyship that we have now, and thank you so much, this is a wonderful place to end, that we have now is I think much more significant than ever before, including the 60s, in all honesty. The question is, how do we harness that? How does that allyship not disappear when the news feed of the day changes to something different, when other priorities come up in America? But without question, we have more allies in saying that change is needed than we have ever had in this country. And I'm very grateful for that.
And does that relate a little bit to your strategic plan? I mean, do you think 5 years ago your strategic plan would have encountered more obstacles than it's encountered today in terms of acceptance and approval?
So I'm going to talk globally, not just at Yale. I would say globally, without question, yes. I would absolutely, because people were most were about anti-affirmative action. How can you even be thinking about doing something for a specific group of people? Yes, I agree 100% that if the things that have happened in our nation in the last year or so that have created more allyship absolutely made it easier for us to move the strategic plan forward and to be bolder in the strategic plan, without question.
Excellent. I guess as we conclude, we have another 3 or 4 minutes. The way it goes is Harry will play the music, and that alerts us to the fact that we're being kicked off. And I just push the envelope until he plays plays the music. But how can they?
So I just want to be. You may have a question for me, but I just want to for your audience. I would encourage you to think about how, in your own way, can you be part of the solution.
Mm.
You know, all of us are not as privileged and empowered as Darin Latimore, Deputy Dean at Yale is. I fully understand that. But each of us still can actually play a role. Each of us can find one young mind to mentor. Mm. Each of us can find one minority organization or business to actually support. Each of us can, in our own way, try and dismantle the current reality to move it towards a reality that we all would see each other's humanity. And I just ask you to think about that each and every day. How can you be actively part of the solution, which means you're helping to dismantle the problem?
Indeed. And even on that note, Darin, I was just as you were talking, it reminded me that when they have the I would call it the baptism ceremony, but the white coat ceremony, you address some of the newbies. To share with us some of the tidbits that you share with them at that point.
Oh my goodness, your recollection is probably better than mine, sir.
Well, it seems to me that's probably related a little bit to what you just.
Well, what I usually try and get newbies in medicine to remember, to reflect on is please never stop listening, especially to your patients. Mm. As you come in, you get great knowledge. Everyone comes in very motivated to make change, and I ask them please not to lose that. Because all of us can be part of the change that we want.
That was probably Harry giving us a heads up, but let's keep on speaking until he plays the music.
So the part that I would translate from what I tell the new doctors, which is to try not to lose their enthusiasm, but equally important, please do not. Please make sure to listen to their patients, because their patients have a lot to teach them. Mm. What I will say to your listeners as a whole is the same thing. Keep your enthusiasm for change. Will it come overnight? Probably not. It's taken us, this country, 403 years to get to where we are right this moment. It's not going to change overnight. But if we keep putting one foot in front of the other, if we keep, again, each of us actively, daily doing something to move us as a nation forward, we will get there.
And are you saying as a related part of that, Darin, that hopefully there'll be a day where you won't even need a diversity and inclusion officer? I'm not trying to put you out of business, but still.
No, actually, that's what should happen. We will have truly accomplished it if there is no need to be, if everyone feels included, if everyone feels that they belong in whatever their setting is, then you are correct. You will not need a chief diversity officer anymore. And America will have finally actually reached its goal of being a country for everyone.
Hmm. Any shout outs? Again, I'm just kind of, Harry's going to play the music very shortly. Any shout outs to people at the organization?
Well, I mean, I was going to say thank you to the entire team that I work with. I give praise because I'm the leader of the diversity, equity, inclusion, but it's all of the staff in the office, each and every one of them whose shoulders I stand on. The work that they do is what makes the office's work even doable. So to each of you in the DEI office, thank you.
Cause this is my road. Let's get action. I'm ready to go.
WNHHLP 103.5 FM.
Gotta get up, hey. Yeah, this is my road. Let's camera action. I'm ready to go. Way too long we faced them storms. Now you gon' face the dawn you waited for. I said from night to dawn, I right my wrongs alone. In competition with warnings, ice galore. Now I'm running toward it, my life to finish being a quitter. But little by little, they joking, telling some riddles. Now I'm in my section, ain't willing to give up. Know you getting knocked down, but you gotta get up. I'm never gonna give up.